and welcome to another Discussing Fitchburg Now, brought to you by the Workers Credit Union Virtual Studios on FATV. This week, we are talking about the upcoming Artists and Ancestors live reenactment, thanks to the collaboration between the Stratton Players and the Fitchburg Historical Society. I have with me right now the chair of the Stratton Players, Sally Cragen.
Hello.
And we have one of the actors, John Williams, who will be playing Herbert Adams, right?
Yes, indeed. Glad to be here.
Thanks for coming on. I tried my best period piece that I have, ancestor-like, for the theme of going back in Fitchburg's history.
Yes. So this show really arose out of a reaction to our membership. Stratton Players, we are now in our 97th season. And it has been devastating for actors not to have an outlet. And we thought, well, we can do theater out of doors. That's, even at the height of the lockdown, you could still have small groups. So we thought about this last summer, and I started doing the work and having meetings with trustees of the public burial ground and the cemetery commissioner and DPW. There's a lot of steps and paperwork and permissions that need to happen before an endeavor of this scale. And then I went on tours with Don Lassala, a past president of the Fitchburg Historical Society, reached out to Susan Navarre, director of the Historical Society. So a whole lot of work had to happen before sitting down to write the vignettes. So the vignettes are 5 separate, very short kind of dialogues and conversations among actual Fitchburg characters who will be portrayed by members of Stratton Players. And John is portraying someone whose work everybody knows, Herbert Adams. So
John, how do we know Herbert Adams?
Well, if you've ever been downtown Fitchburg, you've seen a couple of his pieces. The most famous being the Boys and the Turtles, the fountain at the end of the common. And there's also the Fitchburg War Memorial, and I believe that's in the same general area. But everyone knows the Boys and the Turtles if you've been by there.
Herbert Adams, sculptor from Fitchburg, who sculpted, who did the statues.
That's right. And actually, I did a little bit of very brief research of my own. Nothing like what Sally has done. It's amazing what she's done here. But I didn't realize Herbert Adams was actually not born in Fitchburg. He was born in Vermont and moved to Fitchburg when he was 5 years old with his family, and they made their home here. And he spent a lot of his life in Paris, but he eventually did come home and made his home here as well.
We won't hold that against him. We'll take him. So Sally, the event for the Artists and Ancestors reenactment outside play, that's going to be on Saturday, April 17th and Sunday, April 18th. And there will be 2 showings each day, 2 p.m. and 3:30 p.m.
Yes, and this will occur rain or shine. Tickets are free, but registration is required, and people can register after April 5th, and they can go to strattonplayers.com to do so. And we are limiting the size of our audience. There is a very gentle uphill grade to see part of the show, because I wrote the play to follow a walking tour. So the first grave that we come to is the beautiful sort of Adams family monument, because it wasn't just Herbert. He was married to a really brilliant woman named Adeline Adams, who is played by Amy Newberg, who Stratton Players audiences will know from every kind of part. She's played every kind of part, incredibly talented. I actually have an Adeline Adams book of short stories. I've been reading it. And Adeline was an art critic. She also started as a sculptor, became a teacher, as women had to be, less in the public square, let's say, with their work. And Adeline was Herbert's supporter and he was hers. So they had an amazing life. They knew the Impressionists, including Claude and Camille Monet. They did a lot of work in Paris, and Herbert's first commission was in Fitchburg. So he was someone who was kind of a prodigy as he was growing up, and people knew that. The reason his family came to Fitchburg is because his father did not want to be a farmer. And so Herbert's grandfather had this big farm in Vermont, but the father said, I want to be a mechanical engineer. Farming life is not for me. And then they set up shop in Fitchburg, and the father wanted Herbert also to be a mechanical engineer. But Herbert showed such incredible gifts at an early age that Olin Warner, who's a very famous sculptor, and again, these folks were all very active in establishing the Cornish art colony of the end of the 19th century, and it was very active in the 20th century. It still exists in Cornish, New Hampshire. But Warner recognized Herbert's great gifts, and Herbert's mother was open to letting her son be educated and have this amazing life and career.
And we'll be able to learn all about this and the history and the interactions between the characters right on site, right?
Yes, we will be gathering at the base, at the Mount Elam entrance of Forest Hill. And the first folks that people will see are two women. One is incredibly well known in Fitchburg, the other completely obscure for the most part, except for historians. And that's Eleanor Norcross and Sybil Dean Augusta Fairbanks. And she was of Dean Hill and the Dean Hill Cemetery. And we have two very young actors playing these parts. Alia Kasim of Lunenburg and then Nick Fisher of Townsend are playing Eleanor and Sybil. So the audience will get to see a play right as they're coming in. And again, these are short. These are like 5-6 minutes. Then they walk up this very gradual hill, and there's Herbert and Adeline talking about their life. And then we'll move on from there to H.M. Francis, the great architect of Fitchburg. When we have Susan on, she can certainly talk about how important he was to the city. And then Faye Crocker and Helen Stratton, who are the namesakes. And when Susan's on, I'll talk a little bit more at length, and we'll talk more at length because we've got some nice images that folks can see as we're discussing. And then our last character is a man named Cyrus Thurston, who is a member of the very famous Thurston family. And Asa Thurston, his brother, went off to Hawaii, then called the Sandwich Islands in 1819 to do missionary work. Pretty amazing. And the Thurstons are like still out there, branches of the family. So these are people from Fitchburg who came here, who had extraordinary careers in and out of the city, but who very much were shaped by the city of Fitchburg and the possibility and opportunities that they found.
So how about a little preview of what we might see from Mr. Herbert Adams?
Sally, do you have your your script handy? You can play alongside me.
Where is my? I do. Give me one sec.
Well,
I guess talk for a moment, and I will grab my script.
While she's talking about that, I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. I mean, the amount of work that Sally's put into this, researching and writing, she's done all this by herself, obviously with the help of the Fitchburg Historical Society. But I think a lot of us that are portraying these famous people, we're putting a lot of our faith in Sally's research and her writing talents to provide us with the material and the necessary tools to bring these people to life. And it's fascinating, and it's very rewarding.
We're in good hands.
That's right.
The way you write, I've done this kind of work. Thank you, John. That's incredibly kind. Those are I really appreciate those words, because doing historical research but then dramatizing it are kind of two separate strands. And making these characters come to life for the audience. Again, the audience will tell us. We had a rehearsal last Saturday at the cemetery. We will be there again this Saturday doing some of the scenes. So very exciting. If people are doing their walking Saturday morning, you might see actors out and about, and you're very welcome to stay and watch what we're doing. Sure. Let's, John, if on page 3, we can talk a little bit about the Boys in the Turtles Fountain, and we'll go the let's do a bit of that, shall we?
Sure.
So, but early on before our marriage.
Sure. So, but early on, before our marriage, we did have children in our lives. My first commission was to create a fountain that everyone in Fitchburg now knows as the Boys and the Turtles.
I saw the creation of the two boys every day. I think that he modeled the two boys on himself and his brother, who was much older.
A sculpture should tell a story. That little fellow hiding behind his brother is clearly nervous about meeting those turtles.
And the big brother holds up his hand as if to shield his face from the water.
This sculpture was commissioned by Rodney Wallace, Henry Willis, and Jones Phillips Jr.
It is the first piece of public art in Fitchburg that is not a memorial or commemorative.
Now, I think that our guests might enjoy hearing some of the details of construction.
So, and it goes on from there. So the guests standing there will actually hear Herbert and Adeline, who wrote a piece for the Boston Herald. It's probably 5,000 words. It's like a full page back when newspapers were 8 columns wide, about the creation of this sculpture in Paris. Very exotic. Remember, in the 1880s, America really didn't have native art, right? Everything we did was copied from Europe. And if you were going to be an artist, off you would go to Europe. We didn't have that. And so the American audience, I think, was very willing and very eager. And the fact is, Herbert Adams's career was really launched by some really important benefactors in Fitchburg. And again, Rodney Wallace, who built the library, Henry Willis, and Jones Phillips Jr. Their names come up over and over again in the historical record. John, thank you so much. I want to say, Amy Newberg plays Adeline. She is so fabulous, and come see her. I'm just here for rehearsal purposes.
So this is the Artists and Ancestors play, live action play that's on scene at Forest Hill Cemetery, Saturday, April 17th and Sunday, April 18th in Fitchburg. There are 2 showings each day at 2 p.m. and 3:30 p.m. Tickets are free, but they ask that you pre-register on the website at strattonplayers.com, or you can email strattonplayers@gmail.com. And you can also donate to the cause, because there was a lot of work put in here. So let me ask you one more question. What will the costumes look like, and where do you get the costumes?
So Val Shalofsky, who did the costumes for Anne of Green Gables, which we did last spring, we have some costumes because Stratton Players has done the winter stroll, downtown. So we have some costumes from the 19th century. We also have costumes from Anne, and we're putting those together, but they will be period costumes. The periods represented are 1880s through 1920s. So Helen Stratton, Faye Crocker are going to be 1920s, and Adeline and Herbert are more 19th century. And I also want to say the Fitchburg Cultural Council really made this possible. We also have the Fitchburg Art Museum to thank, the Bosque Funeral Home, very kindly buying an ad, Mayor Stephen D. Natale, and of course, Fitchburg Historical Society, who is our partner on this endeavor.
Fantastic. All right. Any last words with John Williams before we take a break and we speak with the executive director of the Fitchburg Historical Society next?
I just think I'd like to express my thanks to Sally for including me in this project. And it's exciting. I've never portrayed a non-fictional character before, so it's exciting, but it's also a little nerve-wracking, intimidating, because I do feel kind of a very large responsibility to make my portrayal as real as possible, as true as possible. I mean, we might actually have guests there that maybe when they were children they met Herbert Adams and his wife. He died in 1945, so it's very possible, and I'd like to be as true as possible.
It'll be a great conversation. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Mr. Herbert Adams, John Williams.
Thank you for having me.
And Sally Cragen. And we are just going to take a short break, and we will be back with Sally Cragen and Susan Navarre, the executive director of our Fitchburg Historical Society. And welcome back to Discussing Fitchburg Now. We are on with Sally Cragen, chair of the Stratton Players, and Susan Navarre, executive director of the famous Fitchburg Historical Society. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So we are continuing our
Hi.
discussion on the Artists and Ancestors production. That's going to be Saturday, April 17th and Sunday, April 18th at Forest Hill Cemetery. So let's talk a little bit about the different Fitchburg characters that we will see.
Well, we start with Eleanor Norcross and Sybil Augusta Dean Fairbanks. And we meet them as young women, and they will be painting en plein air, as the French say, outside. And Susan, would you tell us a little bit about Sybil Dean Fairbanks? Because she really is not really well known unless you live in that part of Fitchburg at this point.
Yeah, well, I will try. I don't know a lot about her other than she was very active as a painter who lived in Fitchburg all her life, and for whom her Fitchburg history was very, very important. She was descended from one of the earliest families in Fitchburg and grew up, as I understand, in the Upton Tavern. She wanted to make sure to preserve that early Fitchburg history.
So she lived from 1839 to 1929. And I'll see about, I took some screenshots of some photos of her as a 90-year-old woman. And those are pretty amazing artifacts that we found. The next person that people will see are Herbert and Adeline Adams, whom we spoke about earlier with John. And then the third vignette is H.M. Francis, who is a heavyweight in terms of his contribution to Fitchburg history.
We've seen a lot of his buildings all downtown.
That's right. He really shaped Fitchburg during the late 1800s and early 1900s. He and his firm that was taken over then by his sons, and they kept making beautiful, beautiful Victorian architecture for Fitchburg. It's really pretty extraordinary how he took the language of Victorian architecture that you see in various parts of the country, perhaps most famously in Buffalo and in Chicago, but he really just used that language of architecture very fluently. And if people aren't sure if they know what his works look like, well, you've probably seen them all over. Certainly our Phoenix building at 781 Main Street is an H.M. Francis commercial building. And across the street is the Casa de Gracia y Restauración, which earlier the Faith United Parish, and he was a member of that parish. And the entire front with the beautiful rose window is also by H.M. Francis. Right next to the Phoenix building, actually, there's a smaller old building that has a very elaborate round window in the center, and that was an improvement made by H.M. Francis at the end of the 1800s. So other places you can look. Pardon me?
There's like a curved fence, that building, like around.
Yes, and a very big round white window near the top of it. The building itself is from before the Civil War, but that's an add-on that he made in the late 1800s that makes it quite dramatic looking. He was definitely a dramatic architect who knew how to take color and carvings and columns of all different sizes and really manipulate them into some dramatic looking pieces. Also, if you travel around New England, you'll end up stumbling over H.M. Francis buildings everywhere, especially libraries. I'm a fan of pretty little libraries. And frequently when I go in to admire a library, someone will say, oh, well, this was by an architect from Fitchburg named Henry Francis.
Oh, I know.
Well, Francis got very good training from an architect named Alexander Esty in Boston, and he also trained up in Portland, Maine. And the fact that his sons took over the business, to me, is just such a tribute to the strength of his vision, because he did use every single Victorian style, every style that was used in the Victorian period. And the fact that people, again, the Historical Society is a great repository of information, and the fact that people can move into the H.M. Francis building, house that they bought, and then come to the Historical Society and get a little more information, I know has been a real driver. There aren't many places you could go and buy a historic home, and then there's a whole lot of information about your house's architect.
Thanks to the Fitchburg Historical Society, we have a great access to Fitchburg's history, and people come from all around to come see this. So I anticipate this production will be well attended.
I appreciate you saying that, Sam, because we really do see people coming from, certainly when they move to Fitchburg, they often come to the Historical Society to learn more about Fitchburg and its history. But we also have people come from around the world who have a family connection somehow to Fitchburg, and they will visit from Scotland, from Finland, from Australia, from what other places? We had Ireland, Dominican Republic, all over. Canada, of course, French Canada, and they'll visit to find out more about their family here in Fitchburg. And I feel that we're very lucky that the Historical Society was started more than 125 years ago. That's how it is that we have such a huge collection, and one that's so strong in the history of the 19th century. And I think that you notice as we're talking that as the director at the Historical Society, I wear many different hats, but a lot of them are taking care of our collection. And I do talks on our history and I research our history, but I really haven't worked with it in great depth, whereas Sally has come in and done lots of good research. And I'll tell you, she did and she's done it for years and years. In fact, she wrote a dissertation, I guess it's a thesis, on Eleanor Norcross that is just extraordinary as an introduction to Norcross, to art education in the 19th century, and to Fitchburg in the 19th century.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, Eleanor Norcross really was, the circumstances came together to kind of make this woman who she was. And I hate to say it, but I think growing up motherless, she lost her mother when she was a pretty young girl. It kind of accelerated it, her father being a lawyer and then Fitchburg's first mayor in 1872. And Eleanor had some very good friends, the Emersons in Lancaster. And Frances Bowes Emerson, her lifelong friend, who they were at Fitchburg Academy together in the late 1860s. And Eleanor was the number 2 student. Charles Fosdick was number 1, but Frances, her good friend, was number 3. And it's always been in the back of my mind to really explore their friendship and collaboration, because there is a lot of back and forth and letters in the establishment of the Fitchburg Art Museum, or Fitchburg Art Center, as it was then called. But the women of Fitchburg really made things happen. And the fourth group that we see theatrically, Faye Crocker, who lived at Applewild, and Helen Stratton, whose father was a baseball player, actually played a season in the pros in the 1880s. And Helen's background was coming as a very bright young woman. She went to Smith, class of 1901, came back, taught at Fitchburg High School. She was the librarian, and then joined the English department, but she was doing theater in Fitchburg in the teens. And there's a lot of really good research that Don Lassala sent to me in terms of the newspaper coverage of the day, which I'm sure then as now was, people generating their own reports that then were typeset and put in the newspaper. And Helen Stratton, who had this vision of a theater in Fitchburg that would show, every kind of theater that was happening on Broadway and was happening in Europe. Because Helen went to Europe, she saw Irish plays, she had a very rich, deep background. And then when she met Faye, who had a childhood interest in the theater, they made this amazing collaboration and started this amateur workshop. So we have Carol Allard Vansel playing Faye, and we have Carolyn Salter playing Helen. And I should have said that Phil Cormier from Gardner, he's going to be H.M. Francis, and he is really fantastic. He's totally believable as a very thoughtful architect. So that's our fourth stop. But then we finish up with Cyrus Thurston, about whom there's not a lot. But I was originally going to write him as, well, he was the music master. He'd had this, long career running music schools, in more than a dozen schools in the area, starting in 1820. But then I saw that he was overseer in the poor. Barbara Crocker and Doris Kirkpatrick, who did the history of Fitchburg with the city and the river. And I thought, oh, overseer of the poor. And then Susan directed me to the city reports of this era. And we found these astonishing letters and reports that Cyrus wrote in support of Fitchburg's efforts to provide sustenance and shelter and wood and food and help for poor people. Plus, a lot of the poor folks that they did help, their names and the number of children and people in their family are listed in these reports. There is no confidentiality, as Susan said, in the 19th century. So we were able to make a very dramatic.
That was an official city position.
You bet. Right? Yeah, and the overseer of the poor. Oh, actually, go ahead, Susan. The overseer of the poor and the almshouse.
Well, I often explain it to people that, of course, this is before the Great Society programs that we know of. The programs that the federal government had to take care of people who couldn't necessarily support themselves or were between jobs or something, that came in under Roosevelt in the 30s and under Johnson in the 60s. But before that, it was very local, and it was very much a value that New England cities and towns had, that those who might not have family, who might be aged or ill and didn't have other people to help take care of them, that the city would take that on to make sure that everybody in the community was doing okay. And as Sally pointed out to me, she found some info in these records that because Fitchburg did such a good job of it, that sometimes people came from other places saying, well, let me go to Fitchburg and, they'll take care of it. But that's where, if you're traveling in New England and you see that there's a poor farm or poorhouse, that's part of what that is that it's the community allotting in the budget every year from the town meeting or the city council later on, allotting a certain amount of money to help take care of the poor, provide housing, heat, and food for them in one farm or one house that would take care of those folks. So it's very interesting. And many people in Fitchburg know where the poor farm was. It's how do I want to say, along where the pool is now.
Wanuisnock Road.
Road. Yes, it took me a second. Yeah. And so some of the older folks, you don't have to be all that old in Fitchburg to remember the building being there, predating the pool.
So Cyrus Thurston, and who else with Cyrus Thurston?
Well, we actually have someone that he helped. I looked through the records and I found a man named Thomas Hayes, who had 7 dependents and whose profession was listed as a laborer, and who lived over on Pratt Road. But I also found my good friend Gary Withington, the superintendent of streets. I found one of his ancestors listed, and I've got a letter for Gary, I'll get to him, but it shows all the places his ancestor lived. And again, the people that the poor farm and the overseers of the poor assisted, they were all laborers. So when you look in the directories, you've got to do cross-referencing. They're listed as laborers, and they're also at addresses where there were boarding houses. All right. So the boarding house situation in Fitchburg was a really strong part of how we could have a very strong, factory economy. But if you were a laborer, guess what? You were not associated with the Crocker Burbank Mill. You were not associated with the Putnam Machine Company. You were not, you didn't have a fixed profession. And I think that must have been a pretty desperate life for those folks.
So this will be a fascinating look at Fitchburg's history, the Artist and Ancestors event, April 17th and 18th, which we can all go see. There
Yes.
is no charge for these tickets, but they ask that if you can donate, that would be fantastic. And you can do that at strattonplayers.com.
Yes, and donations are going to be shared with Forest Hill Cemetery, because a cemetery to take care of the grounds and the monuments in perpetuity is a very large undertaking for a city. And I know that there are positions on the trustees of the public burial grounds available now. So hopefully we'll have some folks visiting who will take an interest both in the burial grounds as well as the Historical Society and Stratton Players, because we welcome members and you don't have to act. If you just love theater, please come join us.
All right, fantastic.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you so much for having us. And thank you, Sally and the Stratton Players, for pulling this all together, because people have been asking the Historical Society to offer this kind of outdoor tour with historical personages for a long time. But as you see, it takes a big team to pull that together and a lot of talent.
Thank you so much. I love this. This has been nothing but a joy, and going to the Historical Society every week. I now have it on my calendar that one day a week I'm at the Historical Society, because after this I'm thinking, well, what are we doing next? So stay tuned.
Like the beginning of many good things.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you so much, Sally Cragen, Chair of Stratton Players, and Susan Navarre, Executive Director of the Fitchburg Historical Society. And I'm Sam Squailia, and you are watching Discussing Fitchburg Now on FATV. See ya.